So welcome to Write with Impact, Amy.
Thanks for having me, Glenn. Good to be here.
It's great to have you. I know we've known each other on LinkedIn for several years now,
hmm
and I've seen what you've been doing. You've been writing a lot on your under your own name for Forbes
Yeah.
as a Forbes leadership contributor.
hmm
You've also written a lot on LinkedIn, which is my favorite place, as you know.
Me too.
And you've also done a ton of video. I remember when video opened up to the masses, which was a few years ago already. It's already been several
Yeah.
years. I believe you were a first mover and you went in right away.
I delayed 3 weeks, but yeah, I was part of that beta group. Somehow, I have no idea how I was part of that, but yes, I was there.
Right, right. So you've had a lot of success on multiple platforms as a writer and as a video celebrity influencer. I'm
Oh
sure
my God.
you're a video influencer.
Mhm.
So today I'd like to talk to you about writing, about your writing process and how you help clients. You're a social media ghostwriter,
Mhm.
and you help a number of clients, CEOs, C-level clients, to craft clickable, shareable social media posts. A lot of that on LinkedIn, which
Mhm.
is good. A lot of people are still on LinkedIn, and I'd love to ask you about that, and then also ask a little bit about your own writing process and your advice to others trying to become more productive and also more effective with their writing.
Great.
Good. Let's dive right in. But I've been talking a lot in this preamble, so why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do? Who are you?
What do I do? So I'm a social media ghostwriter, and usually people are like, "Oh, that's a thing." Yes, it is a thing. It's a very specific thing. But what I like to explain how I do this is I help leaders craft their stories to communicate and connect better by magnifying their reach and their impact. So the way that I work with leaders, and you mentioned a few of them, so C-suite, certainly founders, a lot of entrepreneurs. That really understand that they have something to say and they'd like to leverage the power and reach of social media to do it. But they either don't have the writing acumen themselves or they just simply don't have the bandwidth. And it's usually the latter. They're just like, it would take me far too long and I'm not sure what to do. So I work with them a monthly retainer basis. We have a weekly standing call of half an hour, um, sometimes less, just because they're that quick and we've worked together that long. It's easy. I know what they have to say in their voice, but it's unlike some people think. I think ghostwriting is that ghostwriter writes everything and the client is not involved and they just pay him and they pretend to be who that's not how I operate. So the ghostwriting I do with leaders is really about pulling out their stories. It's their words. It's 95% of it. It's their insights, their experiences, it's them, but I translate it, I listen to it, and I'm helped to shape that into a concise and compelling written post. And most often, they want to do that on LinkedIn, where they have 1,300 characters or about 200-ish words to do that. And surprisingly, and maybe this isn't surprising to you, people have a harder time writing something concise and shorter and to the point than they do writing a long article or something else, because I feel like they can go on and on and on and on. But you will lose people, you will lose their attention if you ramble, if you do that. So it's fairly easy for me, but it's one of those things that people have struggle with, particular leaders. So in having, all they have to do is show up and have a conversation with me, and I will turn that conversation, because I'll be asking questions and I'll be taking copious notes. I'll turn that into a post or two. And we always work, in their wheelhouse, something that they are expert in, because really what I'm doing is helping them share their thought leadership and bolster their personal brands. So when they share their wisdom, people come to associate those things they share about with them. And when they do it on a regular basis, that helps build up that currency of like, oh, okay, that person is an expert in there, and he always posts about this or she always talks about this. So I come to, it ups their know, like, and trust factor. So it certainly helps them that way.
Great. That's a great introduction to what you do. What would be, what are some of the things that work that you've seen work? Either that they do right, but what that you do right, that you help them do right.
I think the biggest thing is a lot of my clients are entrepreneurs and founders, and typically those people are full of ideas. lots of great ideas. And, but it's about executing on one idea. So in terms of writing, I will keep track of all those ideas and say, okay, that's great. That could be a future post. We could do this, but let's
Hmm.
focus on one. So I really help them focus
Hmm.
and have clarity around what is the one takeaway. So when I'm working with a client, that's always what I do is like, what do we want to say here? What do you want? What do you want to leave people with? What do you want them to take away from this post? Regardless of what I write and how we do it, what is important? What's that one thing? And that forces you to kind of stay in that lane, because it's very easy to go off on a tangent for my clients, and sometimes we'll just keep talking. And the thing that we thought we were going to write about, it turns into something else as they talk it through, because not surprisingly, a lot of my clients are what I call talkers, right? They think as they speak out loud. A lot of us don't do it that way. It's we think in our heads and then we write it down. So for the ones that are my clients and typically are that way, as we are talking, they'll be like, oh, no, no. Okay. Yeah, no, no. That's what I want the takeaway to be. So it helps them get a little clarity too, particularly because we are writing about their everyday life, their everyday world. It could have been a client meeting they had. It could have been something with their staff. It could have been dealing with a pandemic. It could be anything. And that's really what works best, by the way, is not. I think there is this misperception that on social media, you have to just share all the wins and you have to have this, I call it like the Instagram worthy, curated content that it's like only the good stuff, because God forbid you share anything that would portray you as someone who's made a mistake or had a supposed failure. But the opposite is true. People respond to humans, to imperfect people. And when you're a leader, of course, you've made mistakes. Everybody has, and you stumble. But the important thing is when you're sharing about that is to say, this happened, but this is how I found my way out. And something like that is really, it will endear you to other people, but they'll also come to see you as this human, like, okay, well, if Glenn could do it, and make his way through that, then so can I. And so you leave them with something that they connect better with you, because you're not somebody that's up on a pedestal, but you're imparting your wisdom, you're imparting your kind of, this is real, and that genuineness really translates well across social media, because we both know there are a lot of people that do the opposite. And sorry, you're going to alienate people, or they're going to keep scrolling. I would much rather, me personally, read and share something that is, real world, real life, real talk, than just another like made up, thing about, oh, it was the worst this and that, and I'm great, and this happened, or, the models and bottles, and like, everything's so wonderful, aren't I great? And that's the thing too, with each post is really about serving, not selling. So the kind of writing I'm doing is not a sales campaign. It's not designed to, oh, I'm going to talk about your latest offering or your product or whatever. It's not that at all. And some people are like, well, wait a minute, what are you writing about then? That's very foreign to them to, share anything other than buy this, hire me sort of thing. But it's really about providing value. And the way you do that is you share your expertise. And I guarantee every person I've talked, they're like, I don't know if I have anything to share. How could my story and what I'm doing really impact anyone else? You always, always have an impact. And I've heard this, and I'm sure you feel the same way, Glenn, that you'll put something out there and it will impact at least one life, and they will tell you maybe privately or months from that post. And they'll say, and this happens a lot, I'm sure to you too. I've been following you for a while.
Right.
And this happens to my clients too. I've been following you for a while, and wow,
Yeah.
I really like,
Yeah.
I like the way you think. I like the way you move through the world.
Right.
I like your perspective. So depending on my client's
That
goals,
that sounds a little bit like a stalker.
it's not, I hope not,
I'm just
but
I'm just I'm just joking. I'm just joking. First of all, secondly, I do exactly the same thing to other people that I admire, that
right.
I follow on LinkedIn or elsewhere. I just
Hmm.
I just wrote a note exactly like that yesterday, I swear, and I was genuine. So anyway, I'm just joking.
Yes. And that's the thing. And that's super meaningful for the
Yeah,
person who's putting the content out, because often they have no idea. And they think, really, am I just
that's right.
shouting into the abyss and putting out content? But the more you do it, the more regular you do it, the more consistent you are. I mean, my big three, which apply to my clients, apply to myself, apply to anyone else out there. It's clarity, consistency, and discipline. So clarity of message, and keep it to one, and know what you're trying to say and be very intentional with that. And then consistency, make sure you do it regularly. And the discipline is to stay in your wheelhouse, because and I always use this example, if I started posting, if you saw me posting about blockchain or cryptocurrency, you'd probably be like, what? What is Amy talking about? So you can have many interests.
Because I don't understand any of that, I would believe you.
Okay. Well, I've built up enough of that trust factor, I guess, because I
Exactly.
post regularly.
Seriously, I don't. What do I know? I don't understand that.
I don't really either, but I use that example only because it's so foreign from what I do. It's kind of stay
I
in
know.
my lane in terms of doing that, because that
Yeah.
repetition
Yeah.
and that discipline of staying in the 1, 2, maybe 3 buckets where you are expert, that they call it zone of genius, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
what you want people to come to associate with you.
Right.
That's the easiest way to, what do you want people to think of when they think of Glenn? It's like, oh, okay, he's got a podcast and he's a writer and he's this, all these things. But if you weren't
Hold on.
doing
Continue.
that, and he's amazing, he's wonderful at everything he does. Wow, the guy can do no wrong. But
Okay.
but
Thank you.
it's true, is that if you put too much out there, if you veer too far from your supposed expertise, you're going to confuse people. And if you confuse them, you will lose them. They will keep scrolling. They'll ignore you. They'll disconnect or unfollow you if they're like, I don't know what, this person doesn't know what they want or what they're about. So why should I bother giving them my attention, which is, between attention and trust, right? There are the 2 things that Seth Godin said. That's sort of the currencies. You want to make sure you try to gain those.
That's all fantastic advice, Amy. No, seriously, thank you. Honestly, I couldn't have put it better. Clarity, absolutely. And I've written a lot about this over the years. Consistency, yes, I've definitely written a lot about that. And discipline, written a little bit about that. That's a tough one, but it's necessary. How exactly, do you do? You said you have a standing meeting with your clients.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you sense that they are losing interest? Just to be totally blunt, losing interest, but maybe they say they don't have time, they're on vacation or whatever. They come up with different excuses, but you could tell there's something kind of waning there. How do you sort of get them to re-engage or get them to get excited again with what what you're doing? And obviously they have to be motivated, self-motivated. They have to want to do it. These are in general probably very successful people that you work with. Yeah. And they have other things to do and worry about, like companies to manage and people to pay, right? And families to take care of. So how do you, I'm just trying to be very, very practical here. How do you, maintain that motivation, for them? How do you help them keep the spark alive?
Well, a couple things. So first of all, you're right. They have to be self-motivated. I mean, I am the biggest cheerleader and encourager and enthusiastic person you'll meet. But if you're not feeling it, there's nothing I can do that will make you feel that. And I've, this is part of, before I start working with a client, we'll have a call and I'll talk to them and I'll explain, like, it's not just one-sided, and it's, yes, you're talking, I'll make it as easy as possible for you, but you have to have some skin in the game, because it's often not where they fall down in terms of, offering content and what am I going to write about. It's that other piece. So once you've put it out there and they've posted it, it's the engagement and it's interacting with your audience. And I remind them that, that the whole idea behind social media is the social part, that it's more than just, a soliloquy. It's not just one-sided. You actually want people to engage and be intrigued, and you want to attract them into a conversation. And for different people, that means different things. But we talk about that before we even start working together. And if they're like, nah, I don't want, it's like, that's okay. That's not right. Now, if it's a client I've been working with for a long time and they are just, they're burned out because they've gone through, some huge thing, and it happens. I just had this happen actually with one of my longest term clients. And I write for her not only the weekly updates, but also a monthly article. And last week, we normally have our calls on Tuesdays, and she texted me and said, I'm on another call. There is no way this meeting is ending by the time we're supposed to talk. Can we just do this, Thursday, when we were supposed to talk about her article? And I was like, sure. So we get on the call on Thursday and we talk about the updates we haven't done yet. We got that out of the way. And then she's like, what's the list? Because I'll keep a running list of topics about, an article or this. And I run through and I could tell she's struggling. And said, listen, we don't have to do this now. I would rather you. And she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm just, she's about to jump on a plane somewhere and visit. Let's just do it. So we're doing it this week, and she's like, I promise I'll be intentional and do this. But I mean, that's the thing. I'm not a taskmaster, but the idea of having a weekly standing call, it's designed to change your behavior. It's designed for you set aside that time in your calendar and, it's half an hour. It's not long. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. I've had the clients 5 minutes because it's just like, okay, here's what I want to talk about. You got it. You got it. And we've been working together long enough because that's the nice thing about I'm a relationship girl. So if we've worked together a long time, I know your voice. I know the word choice. I know the way you say things. I know generally how you move through the world and what's important to you because we've worked together enough. So if I've had a 5-minute conversation with one of my ghostwriting clients and covered 2 different posts, and they'll be like, you got that? You got it? Enough? I'm like, I got it. And then there are no edits. I mean, it's amazing. So I think it's a trust relationship, certainly, because it's designed to be long-term. And I've had it happen where I have a new client and it's a struggle for them. They're just like, I don't think I don't have a topic. It's more about the fear of putting themselves out there more than anything else in sharing and kind of doing that. And nothing we were sharing was, I would call sensitive or anything necessarily but I think completely foreign to this person about, oh my God, doing this. It's like that. I'm really sharing what I think.
Right.
It's like, yes, that's the point. But in the end, it wasn't right for him. So after a month, it was, and I suspected that. And we'd had a conversation before he signed up. And I said, maybe this isn't the right time for you. Maybe that's fine. I would much rather know that now than go down the road. And it turns out it wasn't. And, we parted ways, but it was fine. And I wished him well. It's no, but so, I think this is one of those things when you are thinking about it, if you are thinking about working with someone, you need to think about it not as just a quick, like, one and done. This is a program. This is designed to be played the long game because it's not a quick sale that you're after. You're building your reputation, you're building your brand. And those points, doing that regularly and putting out content will attract to you opportunities, the audience that you're hoping for, whether that's to attract talent, whether that's to attract partners, investors, business opportunities will come of it. Not directly because, oh, I'm selling this, but because people trust you, because they understand who you are, because they want to work with someone like you, because now they feel like they know you. You've put yourself out there enough that they understand that, okay, this guy's not a jerk. I really like the way he leads. I want to work with this guy. And it's probably not immediate, but it will be down the road that it comes. And that's every single one of my clients has told me that same thing. So I know it works. I know it works because I operate that way and clients come to me for that reason. I don't advertise. They come to me. So I really try to practice what I preach. I'm not going to be someone who's going to tell you to do something and then wouldn't do it herself.
All right. That's fantastic. That's very inspiring. Seriously, the way you describe that. What about just very quickly about images? So how do you select images and just sort of what's your view on images in general? I could start spouting off about what I think about that, but I'd love to hear what you think.
Well, I don't provide images for my clients for their posts, but I would say if you have an image that supports what you're trying to say, fantastic. What I do with my own stuff, I use canva.com, which they have a free version, but I pay for the pro version because I constantly use it. And I use it to reinforce my own brand. It's always in the same color palette, which is my brand color palette. It's always in the same style because much like your writing, if you keep showing up in the same way, people are like, that's Amy's, right? Oh, okay, that's this. So I'm a visual person, so I respond to that. People learn differently. So I think if you're putting out content, obviously as a writer, I value the written word. However, sometimes people, they want to just see it in a visual format. So a picture just for a picture, I'd say don't bother. But if it is underscoring that main takeaway of your content, then absolutely. And I like to, if you can have a pull quote or you can have something that is really going to be impactful that can sit on its own, then I think it's definitely worthwhile to explore that. Well, what do you think, Glenn?
I believe I've seen people do it many different ways. Some people just don't post any image, and I've seen that, and I can see how
Mhm.
it could be effective. I mean, if
Mhm.
what somebody writes is powerful and inspiring and shareable and likable, that's fine. It's great.
Mhm.
I'm actually a strong believer in images. That you
Mhm.
really should have an image that just stops people from scrolling, and it gets your attention.
Mhm.
And not always, but I tend to like having a person, at least one person, human being in the image. People, I think,
Yeah,
relate to that. There's just something about that.
agreed.
I've tested this over, hundreds and hundreds of posts, articles,
Yeah. Hey,
long form,
articles, yeah.
mostly long form articles, but also the short,
Mhm.
the short form posts. And absolutely, I would just say, 99% of the cases, I just say 100%, just definitely have an image. I think there are two types of images. One is sort of the real images of yourself or of you in a group or you
Yeah.
doing something active. That's very powerful, as you know, if it's
Mhm.
relevant. People love real stuff, the
Mhm.
real you. I think
Yep.
that's preferable, but I'm definitely big on stock images if they work, and if they look good, they're not cheesy.
Right.
And my one recommendation I have, one go-to place is unsplash.com.
Mhm. Yes.
I've gotten a lot of good photos there, um,
Yeah.
for
I
for, for
I I
free.
think that's great. Mhm. Yeah, that's always good when you're
Yeah,
writing a
yeah,
lot.
yeah.
I agree with the people images because I think we are wired to search for faces even if they're not there.
Yeah.
And so all of my Forbes articles are always people, usually a single person, but
Mhm.
often, depending on the topic, they'll be
Yeah.
there. And and never doing something silly like cuz there's a lot and it's those one where they're having goofy faces and different things. I don't want someone to stop and just because of that, but I want something. It's like you said, a real human face. It's somebody in a business sense of some sort, not too formal, not too casual, but
Mhm.
something like that. So I always do that with my Forbes articles. I start to go, gosh, did I use this one already? Because it's like, wait, that looks good. Wait, did I use that? It's
Yeah.
like, how often have I done this?
Well, Forbes probably gives you a database of excellent professional stock images, so you have an advantage there, I'm sure, which is
Yeah.
great. But you still have to pick one. You still have to pick a good
Mhm.
one. But let's talk a little bit about writing for Forbes and writing longer form articles on Forbes or on LinkedIn. Doesn't have to
Okay.
be for Forbes, of course. Not everyone
Yeah.
writes for Forbes, but LinkedIn. How do you go about? What's your process for writing a longer form? By longer form, I don't even know how you want to define that, more
An
than
article. Just yeah, we call it
an
an
article,
article.
an article, exactly. And
Yeah.
500, 600 words, 1,000 words or whatever. It's longer than the short term form posts
Yeah.
that you put in your feed. I think we all understand what that is. So how do you do that?
Yes.
And why would you write a longer form article versus a shorter form post? And all that. I'd love to hear how that goes through your mind, because a
Yeah.
lot of people, I'll just say one thing before I actually listen to you, to your answer. I see, people take different approaches. So a lot of people take the short form post approach and can do very, very well. So absolutely. So, but they never write a long form article. And I always wonder why not? And
Mhm.
because I've had quite a bit of success on LinkedIn over the years and elsewhere, writing longer articles, really sort of getting my thoughts out on the page. So I'm gonna pause there, and I'd love to hear what you think about this question.
Okay. So, much like any piece of content, there's still that rule of one clear takeaway applies. So I always start there, almost crafting a headline before I write the immediate article. So I have the idea, then I think about okay, how will this show up? Because the reality with something like an article versus an update is because of its length, someone may just go, I don't know if I have the time, even though it's a few minutes, right? So you want to have something. You have to really think about the headline and make sure that it's not just clickbait, but it delivers on something and it's clear that there's going to be something of value if they invest the time to read it. So I really try to focus on that. With the headline itself, I use a couple of different headline analyzers just to test, to kind of see if it would, it scores it basically from 0 to 100, just to give it. So if something tanks, I'm like, oh, okay, that's not a really great idea, but they're free. They're free things that anyone can use. But I do that, and then the body of the article, you're right, I keep it probably 5, 6, 7, 800 words max. So keep it in that range. And it's sort of the easily digestible thing. So there's one clear takeaway, and I've found it, I'm sure you found this too. People like how-to articles. They like, lists and things too. Not that I want to write the dreaded listicle where it's always, things, but I think what that lends itself to are clear takeaways.
That's right.
So if somebody knows that, okay, if I invest 3 minutes to read Amy's article, but sounds like she's promising that there'll be 3 ways that I can make career progress or, do something that is desirable to them at that moment in time, then I want to give them those things. And so that lends itself to the structure of the article too. So a short, and much like, the old essays, right? An opening that's going to hook them in and tell them what you're going to tell them. And then, sort of laying out, if it's, say it's 3 things, it's sort of those 3 main things so they can follow along. You make it very easy for someone, and then sort of some sort of wrap up. So I try not to overcomplicate it. I try not to write it in such a way that someone wouldn't understand, like using too big of, I love words, but you want to write at a level that it doesn't dumb something down necessarily, but it's very accessible and digestible, and someone can easily go, okay, I get this. So for me, when I'm writing about leadership and career, those are the topics that I cover in my wheelhouse. And in particular, it's really more individually focused about what what you, the reader, can do for you. So it's through that lens. So when you're reading it, it's like, okay, Amy said, these are some things I can do to manage my time or productivity, so whatever it is. So they'll take those away. So I really try to structure it like, what is the reader going to get out of this? What's the benefit to them? And I varied sometimes from that structure because something really made an impact to me. Either it was a book or somebody I met or something where it turned into more of a feature, which is a different structure where it's really more, I've truly interviewed somebody and I'm featuring them and going through. And I like that, but it's a completely different thing. So it's the opportunity to go deeper, the difference between the short post and the long post, obviously, because you have more real estate to do it. But I think you can also, and maybe you're already doing this like I am, you can take a long form article and you can repurpose it into smaller, shorter articles or visuals or pull quotes or different things that you can share across different social media. And remember, if the idea is to have clarity, consistency, and discipline, this is a way to economically invest and write an article, a longer form article, and then pull from that and do that. And I do that. I do that on repeat. And I don't know that anyone knows that I'm doing it. I mean, I've said it, but I'll have a new article come out on a Monday, right? Or I'll usually, it comes out on a Saturday. I share it on Monday on LinkedIn. The following Tuesday, I share the condensed version with a visual that's almost like an infographic of that. And down the road, I will share it as a LinkedIn article, and maybe I'll pull a quote from that and do some other things. But I think you have an opportunity to go deeper with a topic when you have the long form article. And I, though you didn't ask me this question, I feel like it begs this answer that if you were wondering whether you should do the shorter or the longer, the answer is you should do both. I think it's good to have a variety because it can showcase your wisdom in different ways. Right. I think people shy away from the longer articles for 2 reasons. One, they have no idea how to do them, right? They just don't. And 2, I think they worry that it's maybe the same eyeballs won't read them, because the reality on social media is the attention span is brief. So they maybe, if they've found success with shorter, updates in what do they call it, the broetry or whatever, where it's everything's broken down in like one line sentences, that they kind of stick with that. So, I think anyway, I'm getting off topic here, but the articles, and so that's my approach. It's worked. I experiment once in a while, but really the fundamentals are: make sure you're providing value. Think about the reader. What would they want? And deliver on the promise that you have in the headline.
That's great. No, that's excellent advice. And no, you're not getting off topic at all. I'm just listening, and I'm trying not to,
Thank you.
interrupt. It's very good. No, seriously, very, very useful advice. Uh, you have started off on LinkedIn years ago, and then you started to write as a Forbes leadership contributor a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
And now recently you started a Substack newsletter. Substack seems to be taking off. Very, very interesting space there. I
Hmm.
guess what I'd like to ask is how do those three platforms, how do you see those three platforms, and how do you work across those? Because some people I know in the past, people would, maybe they would be on, multiple platforms, and they would just sort of repost the same thing, which
Hmm.
is fine, by the way. It could work very,
Yeah.
very well for them. And I'm not judging that at all, but I'm just curious, how do you see these three platforms? Which one is sort of, stronger? How do you see, do they serve a different purpose for you, right, in terms of building an
Hmm.
audience? I'm just curious about that. LinkedIn, Forbes, Substack, and if I'm missing something, if you're a Medium or whatever, let me know. But those are the three. I
I
follow you very
am.
close.
I've
I
been on
watch you
Thrive
very close.
Global.
I
I'm
watch you very
everywhere.
closely. Yeah, I read your stuff, and so I know you're on those three platforms quite regularly. So tell me about
Hmm.
that.
So, okay, let's start with Forbes. So, as a Forbes contributor, what they ask is for you to regularly contribute. And since I've started, I have done 5 articles per month without fail. So, this is going on, I'm almost 3 years now doing that. Now, writing those articles is fantastic for me. One, because it's a different platform, and Forbes carries with it some cachet. People are like, oh, you're writing for Forbes. Like, ooh, it's like, oh, okay. Even my parents who are like so unimpressed with the social media stuff. They're like, oh, but she writes for Forbes. So it's like that's the little badge of like, ooh, credibility. But certainly having a presence there and having a continued and consistent presence there lets my work there speak for me. So potential clients read that people were like, oh, okay, you do that. So it's certainly a way for a ghostwriter who can't share any of her client work, a way to showcase my own writing and in that format, in a long form, and for a major publication like Forbes. So I see that as directly linked, as almost like my I won't say a lead magnet, but it's certainly, will let people know in a professional sense my ability to write an article. It's like, okay, she can do that. And not just the, yeah, trust me, I have clients sort of thing. I'm a ghostwriter. So they see that that exists. So on LinkedIn, I will share, I just mentioned, I will share that, I use all my social media platforms actually to cross share stuff. But on LinkedIn, where I have the biggest audience, I guess you would say, I share not only articles, but I share updates, shorter updates. I share videos occasionally. I share, they call them documents. So it's the multi-page, PDF things. And it's just showcasing my thought leadership and my content in a different format, because people learn and consume information differently. So those always do really well too. And then you can download that, and it's almost like a little guide. They're like, oh, that's cool. And so LinkedIn is I share Monday through Friday. I used to do it every day, but then Amy decided that she needed to protect her time and establish some boundaries. So I don't do it on the weekends. And I'll pop in once in a while on the weekend, but I think it's really important to, figure out what works for you. So I do this, and I've built up enough of audience. They know they come to expect it. Like I've even had people go, when do you post? So I can be online when you post, so I won't miss it, which is a huge compliment and very flattering. So I do that in the morning. And because I'm West Coast, I'm in California, a lot of people I'm connected with are elsewhere. I have a lot East Coast of the United States, and obviously all over the world. So I always kind of feel like, okay, when should I post? So I post what would be like 6 a.m. my time, which is 9 a.m. on the East Coast, and elsewhere it's like could be the next day, could be whatever. But I try to do that, and then the Substack is relatively new for me. I started it this year. And as a writer, you think, well, why? I don't know why I resisted doing a newsletter. I think because I was worried I didn't want to be like another Me Too newsletter. So the newsletter itself, it's not a complete, none of these, everything is somewhat linked, but the newsletter itself is a chance to be a little more Amy, if that makes sense. It's a little more there's personality. It's much more conversational, even more so than any of my other content. But like my other platforms, I'm always, everything that I write in a newsletter, I think of the audience and like, what am I trying to impart on these people? What do I want them to take away? So I always will have something that you can apply to your career, to your life, kind of what's going on in general. And I try to share more personal stories
Hmm.
on my newsletter. I talk about being a little kid, or, something happening, or it means silly stuff too, but real life. Like I dropped my AirPods in my pool, like, and I rescued them, or something happened, or yeah, I don't know. It could be anything. And the way my brain works is just really wacky. So I'm working on one right now that's not going to be published until this weekend. But what I try to do, because, well, gosh, if I have an audience there, I'd like to point them to another piece of content that, I'll include stuff, but I'll always link to my latest Forbes article, for instance. So in that way they're working harmoniously together. Now, I won't say that the people on Forbes are exactly the same people in my newsletter, but there's going to be some cross pollination. But I figure it doesn't hurt, and it's certainly the newest and latest content to share. So my newsletter comes out on Sunday mornings. My Forbes articles on Saturday mornings. I share the Forbes articles publicly on LinkedIn and other platforms on Monday. But for those that are following and get the newsletter, they get kind of a sneak peek. They get there in there early, and they can see that too. So that sort of primes the pump for me as well, gives it some legs. So that's kind of how they work in harmony. And yes, I haven't done it for a long time, but written for Medium, for Thrive Global, some other platforms as well. And it's the same principles, same sort of thing applies. But I think, for anyone out there who is like, well, where should I post? Where should I do this? It's really about where your audience is. So if you think about, like, for me, the people I'm trying to reach are, potentially people that either I want to connect with because I think they're cool people like Glenn, or they're people that could potentially be a client, right? So my people are leaders, CXOs, founders.
So that's great. So thanks for sharing that. I think I can see some difference in the tone of your writing in on your Substack. It's definitely
Mm.
you're definitely much more a little bit more just freer, more colloquial, friendly, kind of more you, which is great. I love to see that. Um, what I took a poll. I ran a poll on LinkedIn recently where I asked people, what's your biggest writing challenge? And the number one challenge was writing the first draft. That was about
Mm.
45% of respondents. I had about
Yeah.
500 people respond to that. I don't know why
Yeah.
they responded, but anyway, I'm just kidding. About 500 people responded. 45% said writing the first draft. And then the second biggest challenge for them was picking a topic. And then the third was outlining, and fourth was research.
Mm.
And so I'm just wondering, what's your advice for people struggling to facing that blank page on the screen? It's very intimidating,
Yeah.
I get very intimidated. I'm trying to figure out how to get started. How do you do it? How do you get started with your first draft? And what's your advice for others?
So I understand that why it's hard. It's really just getting started. That's the first hurdle always to do anything with writing or something else, particularly when you really want to. But I think what happens is there's a desire, but then they start to put all these fear-based things, like it has to be perfect. It has to, it has to solve the world's problems, all these things that we do to ourselves to layer on top. And it's like, it's just a first draft. It's just get it out there. So for me, what works is, I tend to write in bursts where it's a stream of consciousness. Something will come to me. I typically will have a list of potential ideas for an article or for an update that I keep on my phone, or I have a giant whiteboard where I'll map it out there, or, I have it all over the place. I have different places for these things. Because I never know when inspiration will strike, and it could be something weird. It could be, we have a conversation, something from this, and I'll be like, gosh, I should write about that. Or, I read something, or I watch something, or I listen to something. So I think it's just have something that, that piques your interest, because if you're interested, it'll probably be interesting to other people. If you're not connected to material, that makes it even harder to write about, because you're like, I don't know, you don't care, you don't want it. But Typically, with the things that you care about, it's usually a fear based thing that you're just worried that it won't be good enough or whatever. So take the pressure off and just get it out. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry. There are tools for that. There are editors for that. Just get it out of your head. And if it helps, like if you are a talker, say, versus someone who's a writer naturally, one of my friends mentioned that he does this. He takes his phone and he goes on a walk and he just records himself just talking.
Mhm.
So there's no pressure, but it's transcribed then, and he uses that as an audio note. He's like, "Oh, that's
How
and
does
it
he how does
saved
he
him."
that's excellent. How does he transcribe?
I don't know if he has it on his phone to do it. I know there are different, there's like rev.com
I
that you
use
can
that.
use.
Very good. Rev.com is
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah. So, just the idea of is you need to get it out of here and onto a page. And
Right.
if that process involves you using your mouth versus your fingers,
Yeah.
then that's okay. That's your process. But that has worked for him really well. So he's a talker. And I've mentioned that to a few of my own clients who are the same way. And they're like, oh, it never occurred to them that they could do that. So that's one way to just get it out. Because once you have something, then it's the editing, right? Then it's you go back and you do more things, but it's always that first step of just getting it out there. So I think give yourself permission to not for it to not be perfect, and just get it started. Because once you start something, you tend to keep momentum, right? Action begets more action.
Hmm.
But if you sit there and you're staring at a blank page, you're never going to happen. Just do something that it's low risk, just put it out there. But I think having some sort of connection, some care to the material and the topic that you're writing about certainly will help you get there too.
No, that's excellent advice. Excellent advice. And then the other challenge that people had, as I mentioned, was figuring out what to write about. And so yeah, how do you think about that? And what's your advice around that?
I draw a lot of my inspiration and my just like I kind of see my everyday world, right? So I mean, depending on what I'm writing this for, right? So if it's a Forbes article, it's got to fit within sort of this umbrella of leadership, career sort of world, and how does that
Hmm.
apply and what is the topic there? Um, so I write a lot about emotional intelligence and soft skills and leadership in general and kind of being your best you. There are different nations. And then I write about challenges. So I think, I will get my inspiration from how I'm feeling, quite honestly. It's a little selfish, but it seems to work because I will tell you a secret. Every single article on Forbes that I've written is something that I needed to hear first,
Hmm.
So, writers aren't perfect. They go through writer's block and frustration too, and like, what am I going to write about, sort of thing. And sometimes that ends up being the topic. Where it's like, okay, well, how do you beat frustration? How do you power through a writer's block? How do you,
Hmm.
when you feel, I've written about this several times. When you feel stuck? Because when you take it out of, okay, what am I feeling, and then
Hmm.
you can zoom out of it. It's like, well, okay, if you're feeling stuck, a lot of people can relate to that. So that seems like that's probably a good topic to cover, and go from there. So I don't know if that that's usually what works. It starts with me either because I need to hear it or it's something that I saw, listened to, heard, whatever that
Hmm.
sparks a connection between something or gives me sort of a fresh take on a much written about topic. And it's like, okay, yeah, why don't we take it from this angle and see that seems something that's somewhat new.
Hmm. No, that's great. That's very helpful. What about outlining? Do you do any outlining?
I do it within my draft. So like I said, if it's gonna be like an article where like, all right, we're gonna have 3 or 5 or whatever, sort of I try to do it that way and then fill it in a little bit later. And I'll do that I try to write in advance as much as possible to kind of and when that when that brilliance, shows up, which is not always the most opportune time, or when I say I'm gonna write an article right now. So I'll just try to capture that. I think that's the thing, and then have that outline so I can go back and fill it in later. But it's the same idea. I mean, once you know kind of generally what you want to write about and have some semblance of an idea, it's fleshing it out on the page for me. Sometimes I'll write it down like a handwritten, on my notepad with a pen, the same idea. Like, okay, what are the things that might relate to this? What are the couple things I want to include? And then I'll scribble and be like, ah, that's not right. Or I'm going to change the order, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to cull it down even further. But, the first draft, it's a draft, right? So it doesn't mean it's going to end up that way. And I think that's the thing too, like I said earlier, is it's not permanent. It's part of the process, and that's okay.
Mhm. How many ideas do you have in your in your note app? And by the way, what do you use? What app do you use to keep? You have a whiteboard, so I get
I
that.
have a
So
whiteboard. I
mhm,
do. And even well, I just use the notes function in my iPhone for that, where I'll
sure.
just keep like sort of things. Or I'll
Mm,
have a list, a physical, like a, pen and paper list, or on a sticky or something,
right,
depending on when it comes to me. If I'm,
right,
sleeping and wake up, I like write
right,
it down in my journal or something like
right.
that. If I'm
Like
out and I have my phone, I'll just dictate it or type it in there.
right, how
Um,
many ideas do you have like right now? And then the other question related to that is, how many do you see that you just end up, never writing about, never getting back to, and they just sort of sit there, and then you go back years later and you realize, I should have written about that at that moment. I'm
um,
describing myself.
yeah, I was going to say, does this, yeah, what did you tell me?
Yeah.
I, I probably, I probably have 8 to 10 ideas at once, mulling around in various stages of, completion and,
Hmm.
thinking through them.
Yeah.
Some are just, and when I say ideas, I'm using that very loosely. So it might be a phrase, it might be a couple words that will trigger
Sure.
like, oh yeah, this and that.
Right.
I also keep drafts in the back end of Forbes for articles. So there, the same thing happened to me where I went to just kind of sort by the ones that have been published or the ones
Hmm.
that are. I'm like, wait, where did those 8 drafts come from? Like, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
I haven't written about that, or it seemed good at the time, and then I was like, nah, I don't like that. But that to me is like a little gift that you're like, oh. So it's like, could I find new inspiration here, even if it differs from the original intent or where I was going with that piece of content? Can I
Right.
do something now? So yeah, I probably realistically 8 to 10. And with my newsletters, there's probably equal amount, just like, okay, so it's kind of just having that going. And sometimes it's a list that I think, oh, I should write an article on Forbes about this, and then I'm like, nah, I'm gonna put it over here. Or something that I thought was, oh, this is it starts as a kernel of an idea for a newsletter, that I'm like, well, wait a minute, I can act. And that's just happened to me, where I'm gonna pull out from that because I think that there's enough meat there that it can be a standalone article.
Right.
So
Right.
so I think it's just being flexible and having that. But that idea of getting it out of your own head and putting it somewhere that you can access
Hmm.
later, because I will tell you, this has happened to me too many times, where I think, oh, I'll remember. I'll remember that idea, that
No,
brilliant
you
thing that
won't.
came to me at 2 a.m. I never do. I
That's
never
right.
do. So it's worthwhile, even if it's not the best time, to just make sure you put it somewhere, and then you can go back to it.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. That's why I try to jot things down, ideas down as much as quickly as possible. I think I've used, for many years, I used Evernote,
Mm-hmm. And that, yeah.
and definitely, the just the notes app on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I use Medium, not to publish, but actually just to do two things: to write my ideas down and to actually write the first drafts.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I like the interface; it's very clean. But
Mm-hmm.
then I publish elsewhere, and
Shh.
yeah, exactly. No, I've said this before. But yeah, so getting the ideas down. So just what's your final sort of parting advice for? I mean, just talking to you, it's very, very impressive what you've done. You work very, very hard. I think this is not easy. And for someone, looking to try to start or pick up the pace of their writing, and I think there's a lot of people out there, a lot of people trying to start. I know some people are trying to
Yeah.
start. They say they want to start writing.
Mm-hmm.
They get excited by it, but and which is great.
Yeah.
What's your parting advice for them? Because not everyone can be like you, as productive as you. But maybe they hopefully they can learn from you from this discussion today, which I really appreciate. You sort of
Mm-hmm.
shared a lot of your methodologies and your approaches and the way you think about it. I think it's wonderful. So what's your final piece of advice?
I think, going back to what I call the power trifecta, right? It's the clarity, consistency, and discipline. I think when you're writing, be kind to yourself. It's not going to be perfect. There'll be times where what you write and you publish, it won't be your best, but you have to have a balance of that. In order to have something be your best, you have to have something be your worst, and it's okay to be somewhere in between because usually it is. So keep writing, keep at it. I think the other thing is when you're writing, it's that one clear takeaway, and think about your audience. Think about it. When you make it easy for them to understand what you were trying to say, then they can take some bit of value, some little nugget away from them. Then you have done your job well. And I think, if you confuse them, you lose them. So don't do that. Keep it clear, keep it concise, keep it to one thing. And I would say too, it's like if you're hiding in the shadows, stop hiding, right? Just put yourself out there.
That's very inspiring. No, thanks a lot. And so how can people reach you?
Well, I'm certainly on LinkedIn as much as Glenn is, so you can find me there. You can visit my website, which is amyblaschka.com. I am also on Twitter and Instagram too, and Clubhouse sometimes. And I would love it if you would subscribe to my newsletter, which is called Illuminate Me. And Glenn mentions it on Substack. It's amyblaschka.substack.com. And all of those links, I'm sure, will be in Glenn's show notes, but certainly you can find them all on my LinkedIn profile as well as on my website. So I'm everywhere. You can find me all over the place, but primarily on LinkedIn as sort of my bread and butter and favorite platform.
That's right. And how do you spell your last name?
B as in boy, Laschka. And Amy is just AMY. Simple.
Okay, that's great. No, Amy, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm so thrilled that you could join me on Write with Impact.
Yes.
And yeah, I'd love to have you on again sometime. And maybe at sometime we could do this live on LinkedIn.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I would be game. I would be game for that. That'd be great. Well, thanks for having me today, Glenn. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to doing it again soon, hopefully.
Good. Thanks.
Mhm.